Lead Well, Live Whole, the podcast where leadership meets life. Your host, Michael Sermon, is here to help you rise above the noise, lead with purpose, and live with clarity. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to the Lead Well, Live Whole podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sermon, and I'm very thankful that you're here. Today is an exciting day. We have a very special guest, Frank Boudreau. Frank and I have known each other for a lot of years, and we've worked together. We've worked alongside of each other, and we've been there to support one another when things were down and celebrate when things were up. Frank and his family had an incredible restaurant, a Cajun restaurant for a while that really helped me gain a lot of weight. But it was really good, and it was a sad day when it shut down. But you've all heard me talk about Frank in the past. Frank is the guy that when we were working together at an aerospace company, we had some stuff going on, and I was starting to get downhearted. And Frank is the one that came and told me that no one can make me a victim unless I allow them to make me a victim. And it sounds simple, but when you're in the middle of the storm, it's hard to see the port. And that was enough really to turn me around to the point that 20 years later, I still use that phrase a lot. In fact, I've talked about it a lot on the podcast. So with that, Frank, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. And it's really, it's fun. And at the same time, it's funny, and then also at the same time, it's kind of humbling when somebody says that something you said or did 20 years ago impacted.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that something that I said to you, and I'm going to tell you, I can't take credit for that. I call those God moments, right? And I feel like God just kind of plopped the right thing in for me to say that was at the right time that you needed it. So yeah, let's thank God for that God moment, because those are impactful and life-changing. Pretty cool. No, gosh, we've known each other for, I think it has been about 20 years.
It has, yeah.
Worked together. We've worked for each other in some way, shape, or form.
That's true.
As consultants and colleagues, but also been friends for a very long time. Michael has carried many positions in the manufacturing world, as well as the local community and in the church. And he's been leading at various capacities for a very long time, as long as I've known him, and does a fantastic job at leading. I've always been an admirer of you, Michael, in all sincerity, because I really appreciate the way you lead out of who you really are. I've never found you to try to be something that you're not. You lead genuinely out of who you are, and I admire that and respect it. And it's one of the reasons why I think we connect as well as we do. Michael is venturing off into a whole new life, and we're all excited about it. And I'm super excited about supporting him in books and podcasts and speaking engagements, all new horizons. So congratulations on that, Michael.
Thanks,
Frank. A lot of you heard me talk about Michael over the years. Yes, I've talked about you too. So if you've known me very long, you've probably heard a story or two over the years about some of the work that Michael and I have done together. So I'm excited to spend some time hanging out. Let's talk some leadership stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. All right, this is my hope is we just have a good conversation. Sit back, drink some tea, just have a talk, right? And it's really kind of humbling when somebody starts talking and saying good things about you. But in all fairness, I'm not smart enough not to lead from who I am, because I can't remember who I'm supposed to be at different points. And so it's easier just to be me all the time. And I've had people hit Tammy up, and she'll run into somebody that has been on my team or that's in that I've worked with, and they're like, "Hey, is he the same way at home?" And she's like, "Yes, he's what you see is what you get. If you like it, you'll like it everywhere. And if you don't like it, you're not going to like it at all." And I will say though that once I cut down on the sarcasm, it made me a lot more enjoyable to be around.
Well, it's got to be put in there at the right moment.
It does.
Now, you gotta have some good.
It does. But that was a shocking moment when my coach helped me realize that that's not actually a communication style or an accepted communication style. But, uh,
Yeah.
but then you turned right around and followed it up when we went up to Missouri, and I had you come up and we're helping with the team there. And, I had a whole team full of sarcastic people, and
This is
it
true.
was good. They were,
You were in your element.
I mean, they were rock solid, still are. Um, and it's fun because I've actually hired people before just because they were sarcastic. Didn't know if they could
Yeah.
do the job, but I needed somebody who could think quick on their feet
True.
and could, and so I hired this guy just based off of that. And
Wow.
I mean, and he was exactly what I thought he would be. And I mean, he was very sharp-witted. He could adjust quickly. He could turn on the fly. And then he went and got married, and somehow he lost his ability to shift around. So
That's a whole other conversation.
I know it, but it was she settled him down. So he lost sarcasm. He suddenly got very solid in his ways, and um, he's still good at his job. Just wasn't as fun to be around.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right. Uh, all right. So today, I really would like to have a conversation, Frank, mostly focused on you, right? And the skill sets and the talents and the things that you have done and the things that you've experienced. And my my people, if I can call them that, most of the ones who listen to this podcast are new and aspiring leaders, or are maybe a little older, but are wanting to upgrade their skill sets, right? And honestly, some of them were just bored and they found the podcast and they didn't want to shift to something else. But that's okay. I like them too. Um, but you've had an incredible career, right? And I remember when you first really started venturing into the leadership piece of it, right? You always done leadership, but when that really became a primary focus, and especially when it was your full-time focus, right? That first full-time focus, and watching that transformation in you, right? It was more than just I'm doing a different job. It was something in you had changed. But
Yeah.
I talk to a lot of people, and I hear a lot the question of, or the comment that, well, I think God has called me to lead, or I think this is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm not really quite sure. And I know you and I went through some training programs together, and the 1 degree and different things to help us identify that thing that we're passionate about. But I guess the reality, I just really want to ask you, when did you first realize you were called to lead? Was there a specific moment, or was there a season that clarified this for you?
So I, that's a great question. And I've had young leaders trying to figure that out as well. And honestly, my first leadership role, it's surprising. And so the important element of what I say is oftentimes everybody else knows it before you do.
Right.
So the short story is I was a fabricator at a small company of, I think at the time, about 50 or 60 people in Texas.
Just a cabinet place?
No, this was glass.
Oh, the glass. Okay, the glass place.
Glass fabrication
Yeah.
company. So it was before the cabinet place.
Okay.
So it was my very first leadership role. I was a fabricator. I had only been with the company about 6 months, and it was growing. The manufacturing side of it was growing. They had installation and manufacturing, and the manufacturing side was growing. And the ownership decided they needed a manager for production.
Right.
And out of blue, they called me up. And quite honestly, it was an answer to prayer because my wife and I had just been praying about some other things financially and positionally and that sort of thing. So it answered a prayer at the very same time. But what I'm driving at is the boss calls me up into the office and says, we've decided that we need a production manager over our production area. And he said, we think you're the one that should do it, which shocked me because I'd only been there 6 or 7 months. I was one of the younger people there. I think I was 20, 28 years old. And so it surprised me.
Right.
So other people and then when they gave me the position, even though I'd only been there 6 or 7 months, nobody was shocked about it. I was expecting some of the guys that had been there, 5, 10 years,
Right.
team to be upset, but nobody was shocked. Everybody was very accepting and received it well. So later in life now, I'm looking back on that, realizing they all knew it before I did.
Right. But
They saw that in me before I saw it in myself.
but if you think about it though, think about your career, right? Think about your children, your sons.
Yeah.
How many people have you worked with? And there's no set number, but
Sure.
but there are people you've worked with that you saw their skill sets and their potential long before they did, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, think about it. Jesus saw who Peter was long before Peter did, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's been that way through our whole life. I mean, even Gideon's hiding behind the threshing barn. And the angel appears and said, "Oh, mighty man of valor," right? And here's a guy that says, "Look, I'm sure he stopped and looked around. Who are you talking to?" And I can picture you the same way, because what I know about you is you analyze things.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say overanalyze, but you chew your cud more than once. That's for sure, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm picturing a young Frank Boudreau who's in the midst of all the chaos and
A lot
more hair. Probably you had a fro back then, right? Didn't you have that cross?
wasn't quite a crew, but I was capable of growing sort of like it was very
Yeah, it's very curly. Yeah. So, but I can picture you when it's presented, and probably just standing there for a minute, just blinking, just trying to figure out, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because you like a plan, right? You like to know where we're starting, where we ended up, and every turn we're going to take between here and there, which God doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah, it came out of the blue. It was
Yeah.
100% unexpected, just out of the blue, middle of the afternoon. He calls me up in the office, and you're exactly right. I sat there with this dumbfounded look on my face.
Yeah.
Sure. And I'm staring at him, and he literally looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" I was like,
Yep.
"Yeah, just taking me a minute."
Yep. I can see
I
that.
had to look at him. I even looked at him and said, "Are you sure?"
Yeah.
I'm like, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, "Absolutely." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
So now I had some questions about when you identified it, who helped you identify your talents, and who helped push you into leadership role. But I believe the Bible is very clear. Your gifts and the talents open doors, right? Make the way for you. That we have a plan, but God directs our steps. And
If you submit to him, if you submit, yes.
submit to Him, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think circumstance and opportunity open the door for you. And then once that door opened, then really your natural skill set, your natural heart began to come out, right? Because you have a heart for people. You've always had a heart for people. Yeah, at least since I've known you. So you're sitting there, you're dumbfounded. I'm sure Dina was not surprised at all. She knew it was coming long before you knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, my wife is never surprised by anything. She always knows well in advance, or at least tells me she does. So, so I know she wasn't surprised when you got home. But what was that conversation like when you got home? Or did you wait till you got home?
I did.
We didn't have cell phones back then, did we?
That was we were just about to start getting cell phones.
Yeah.
No, I didn't have a cell phone yet.
Yeah.
Only the executives had cell phones, and it was a big giant mobile ones, right?
So you went out back, tied the note onto the carrier pigeon, you sent it home.
Yeah. So I get home, but and like I said, it was at the very same time it was an answer to prayer. So we were making some tough financial decisions.
Right.
We had young kids. Our daughter was recently born. So we were struggling with paying babysitter with her working. And so we really, really felt impressed by the Lord that she was supposed to stay home.
Right.
And we were trying to figure out how that was going to work. And quite literally, and I've shared this story many times over the years. We sat down, pen and paper, looking at our budget. What's it going to take? This was like a week before the boss calls me up and says he wants me to take this position. And we ran the numbers, and we're $100 a week short.
Right.
and we're like, God, I don't know how this is going to work. But we were early in our faith and learning how to lead and step out. That
Right.
was a big deal for us. I mean, that $100 a week was a mountain. And we prayed about that for a couple of days. We really felt like God was saying, you got to trust me. So she pulled the trigger. She turned in her notice. And literally a week after that notice was after we turned in the notice, like there's no now, they called me up. And so I'm sitting in the office after he hits me with this decision.
Right.
He said, and before I said a word about, I didn't ask about money or anything. I was still shocked. And he looked at me and said, and so what we did was this is him talking to owners. He said, what we did was we went back over the last 3 or 4 months and looked at how much you made each week, like a weekly take home. Because he said, you're always here and you're always working. So you had a lot of overtime. So we included any overtime. We just looked at what you took home every week.
Right.
And so that you would take home an
additional, you cut out on that additional how much?
$100 a week, which is exactly the number, right? And so I did exactly that. I just started grinning and laughing, and he looked at me like, "What?" I'm afraid he thought I was upset about it. No, and so I told him the story. He was like, "Wow," and he was a believer as well.
Right.
He was like, "Wow, I love how God works." So that conversation, quite frankly, was as much, if not more, about this blessing that God just hit us with than it was about taking the leadership role. But all that being said, she was not surprised at all because I said, I don't know why they're asking me to do it. I've only been there 6 or 7 months. I'm one of the youngest guys there, blah, 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 right? I'm disqualifying myself. And she looks at me and she says, I know exactly why they picked you.
Yeah.
And so, here's what I want to caveat before we move on to anything else. There's been a lot of times where I've heard folks say, I really, I feel like I'm called, and I've heard this quite a few times. You probably have too, where somebody feels like, they've been called into leadership in some capacity.
Right.
When they're the only person thinking that. So not that it can't happen, but it's very rare that God's going to call you into something that he didn't already gift you in some way.
Right. But he will always call you into something that's uncomfortable.
Oh yeah. He's going to call you in. Sure. Yeah.
So before we transition on, I want to ask you this. What do you think it was? Because now you've got a lot more experience. So looking back, you can be critical. What characteristics and what traits do you believe that you exhibited that said Frank is our guy? And I ask that because there's a lot of young people out there. A lot of them say, "Hey, I want to do it, and I don't know why they don't pick me. Why am I never that one? Why, it's always that why? And I know it wasn't just because you showed up every day, because there's probably a lot of people that showed up every day, right? So
absolutely.
So what was it that made you the guy?
And quickly, the thing that runs to my mind is be the leader you wish to become. So let that sink in while I'm answering the question. One was work ethic. I did have, and always have, and very strong work ethic, showing up, not just being there, but being engaged and involved.
We call that being there, right?
Yeah.
Being present, right?
Being very present.
Yeah.
And something that I've always done, kind of because I'm wired this way, but I was a problem solver.
Yep.
And something I always told young leaders, I've told all my kids this, as they're all adults and have their own families, is if you will problems, the world is full of problem tellers, people that want to tell you what the problems are, but the world is desperate for problem solvers. So being a problem solver, that was one. So work ethic, problem solving, but also I had a good working relationship with the rest of the team. The rest of the team really respected me. And a lot of it, some of it was just background and knowledge. And even though I'd only been there 6 or 7 months, I had a lot of knowledge and background in the work that we did.
Right.
But so I was, again, present and engaged, and I was always trying to help the team learn, find ways to make things run easier and smoother. So I was always trying to help other members of the team, and I became kind of that go-to person for challenges and that sort of thing. So being very engaged with the team, being very present, strong work ethic, things like that, problem solve. Those are probably the primary.
Yeah, I think you've heard me say many times over the years, and probably said it yourself, that in a leadership vacuum, the natural leader will step up, right?
Absolutely.
And we always think that means that it's you're the supervisor, you're the manager, whatever. But the leader doesn't need a title, right? The leader is not the most senior person, right? Sometimes the leader's the janitor, not the CEO, and it is about being there, willing to do it, right? And I bet you have never one time in your life uttered the phrase of "That's not my job."
Only when I tell somebody not to say that.
Right. Yeah.
So you're right.
Yeah.
No,
But so,
I meant that one at all.
yeah. But it's the same way, right? That was my career. It was, if there's a problem, that's where I wanted to be, right? Or that at
Yeah.
least that's where I ended up, because I don't like being number two. I like being number one, right? Not necessarily the highest ranking, but number one in that. I own that and I do that. And
Yeah.
I want I want to own my own destiny. I want to own my own success, right? Um, so I would gravitate toward those areas that nobody else wanted, right? Because that was not necessarily, it wasn't a conscious thought of that's the opportunity to stand out and stand up, but that's the opportunity to build an identity, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so my whole career has been that way. If there's a problem plant, I get it. If there's a problem, right? If there's a problem department, I get it. Problem people get shifted over to me, right? Challenging issues, but that's okay because I love that stuff. I get bored very easy. So that's like right now, right? Everything we got going on with the website, the publishing company, and the podcasts, and the books, and my own books plus other people's books, and trying to work through all of that. There's a lot, but
Yeah.
it's fun, right?
Yeah.
Until those days, it's not fun, and then it's work, and then the next day we fun again.
Yeah, but those challenges really ignite you. Those challenges fire you up. They get you. They motivate you.
They do.
In the right way, in a very good way. And so you lean into them.
Right. That's true.
Which is powerful. You lean into them. You're wired that way.
Yes.
Until
it's 2:30 in the morning, you can't sleep because your brain's still working on it.
That is not so great.
Yeah.
You said so. You like being that number one from an owning it perspective. And earlier, this transition that I went through that you witnessed,
right?
That I don't know if you were going in that direction or not. Maybe you were. We were in that direction, but it all kind of ties together in that a lot of success in that position. And then I still to this day don't. They found me. So this is, like I said, this is before Indeed and all these other things around 99 and 2000.
Right.
This cabinet company up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is how I wound up here. They find me and recruit me and hire me into a next level up position,
right?
A production or manager kind of role. And I had about 130 indirect reports and 6 or 7 direct reports, supervisors that reported to me, and that was tough. Again, I'm like, I've just been running this little shop, what do I know about? But I stepped in and leaned into it. It was again another financial answer to prayer, a family answer to prayer, because we were, primarily my wife and I are from Oklahoma, so we were happy to get back to Oklahoma. So that worked out as well. God's kind of been integrated into this whole thing. Not kind of, but absolutely have been. But so I felt myself discovered I was having success in these leadership roles. And so I had it in my head that, wow, someday I'm going to be, a COO or, the big manufacturing facility, that sort of thing. And then I faced my first real career setback. which was at the company you and I worked at together, where I hired in as a manager.
Yeah.
It did not go well. Matter of fact, kind of like I was the last person to realize I was really meant for leading. I was the last person that realized I was failing that particular role. Uh, so, I go from thinking everything's going great on a Thursday, and then Friday afternoon, I'm sitting in the HR director's office with the owner and the general manager and the HR director, and they're telling me that I'm being removed from a management position. I'm going to fulfill an individual contributor role.
Right.
Off in the corner. I got to move out of my office that afternoon, So I went through this setback, which was really tough. And then I went through this process. Right about that same exact time, I run into this guy, Dave Jewett, which if you ever get a chance to visit with him on your podcast, I can introduce you.
Yeah, believe it or not, you have introduced me to Dave. Yeah. He and I, we had, yeah.
That's right. Well, I'll put a bug in his ear about doing a podcast with you. I'd love to have him on. Good dude. But anyway, he and I are still very connected. So I run into this guy, and he basically inadvertently becomes a lifelong life coach for me. And he walked me through his process, Year 1 Degree. Mm-hmm. And during that process of self-discovery, which was really very worth it. So if you've never heard of that, I'll put a plug in. Year 1 Degree is actually a coach for Year 1 Degree as well. But regardless of who, trying to figure out what you're really wired for, what you're designed for. That's a fantastic process to go through.
I tell you what, I think you introduced me to it years ago. I went through the program. It was awesome. I'm an evangelist for the program, right? If somebody comes up and they tell me about their child is struggling, trying to figure out where they're going or what they're doing and all that, I'm like, here's the program you need. And they're like, yeah, but there's only 12. I don't care. The younger you can get in there, the better it can be. That way they can start focusing. It will help them find their purpose. They're not failing. They're just putting all their energy into the wrong things. They're putting their energy into areas that are draining them and are making it a struggle and making it a challenge. But if we understand, right? Yeah. And we ignite that passion. Matter of fact, my very first podcast was over this very issue, right? Wow. And it's a pandemic level issue in the world of people wasting their time and their energy chasing after something that someone else set the identity for them. Yeah. So sorry about that. I get passionate about that because that, to me, that is huge.
Me too. 100%. That's one of the life draining things that happens. And what's really tragic is when you wake up one day and I went through this process 20 years ago. So I was in my mid 30s, which is late in my opinion. Now I wish I'd have learned that earlier. Yep. But the reality is most people in their 50s and 60s turn around and go, wow, is this it? I mean, is this what anyway? So I agree with you 100%. It is, especially in today's time with all of the social media and everybody's posting their best life and all this kind of stuff. So people are confused about what they should really pursue and they're looking outward. And this process helps you understand how to look inward because God's placed everything in you already. And he's kind of been nudging you, trying to get you going in that direction. But we've got so many distractions. We're not really paying attention to what he's doing in our lives. He's always guiding us towards our purpose. Always.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. But you said it earlier, right? When you submit to the path, when you submit to the plan, when you don't fight it, when you understand who you are, you commit to who you are, and you stay true to that, and your core is set. Right? That's the whole last week's whole podcast was about that, right? And it won't be last week by the time this shows, but it was all about that because the inconsistency that we bring to the table, then we spend all of our time fixing the problems we started because we were chasing the wrong thing. And it comes because we don't know who we are. Back to what I said earlier, Gideon had no idea who he was. Joseph had no idea who he was. David had no idea who he was, right? But the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They had no idea who they were, right? In fact, we're even using their real names, right? Moses. But when they went through the desert, when they went through the flood, when they went through the fire, when they went into the prison forever, however many times it was, right? When they got called onto the storms and had to step out on the water, that's when they began to see and understand and know who God said they were. And they were able to submit to it. That's what you went through. You said yours was, I'm sitting in front of the owner and the GM and the HR director, and they're saying, hey, this thing that you think you've been successful at, really, you kind of suck. So we have a better opportunity for you. Yeah, and we've all been there. We've all had that. You suck moment.
Right word. That's almost the word.
Hey, I stood in front of that same. I stood in front of that same GM who told me that although I was hitting every goal and hitting every target, I still wasn't succeeding. And I asked him why, and it turns out because it didn't feel like I was succeeding. Well, because I wasn't passionate enough about it. So then I had to learn to exhibit more passion. And after that, I didn't change anything other than every now and then I'd go in his office and blow up, and suddenly I was succeeding.
Got to throw a fit. That was his style.
It was.
It was so eye-opening for me because it was a setback. So here I was. I thought this is my pathway,
right?
To discover I'm not. So then I go. So I had something get my attention. Is what I'm driving at. This event got my attention so much so it set me back. I mean, I went. Now looking back, I know I actually went into depression.
Oh, you did? I remember those days.
What it was, but that's what it was. Yeah. I literally went to depression. The first thing I had to do was set my mind straight because I got to show up to work on Monday.
Right.
And to be honest with you, so that was Friday afternoon. On Saturday, I wanted to quit.
Yeah.
I wanted to just not show up on Monday, go find another job. I mean, it hit me that hard. I mean, it came out of where.
Was that pride or identity?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was both.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really was. But at the time, it was just hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it felt like.
Yeah. And honestly, though, I think that's fair because you said it earlier. You're going along in your mind, you're being successful. Everything is going well. And then out of the blue, and we see that happen every year when people get their reviews. They walk in thinking it's great, and then they're surprised by the stuff. That's a failure on the part of leadership, right?
Yeah.
Not have that conversation with you up front long before you fail.
100%. And that was the event that to this day, and you've heard me speak this to leadership groups personally.
Yeah.
That's a strong message that I have for leaders in that a review should never be a surprise.
No.
Just a recap of all you've had throughout the year, where they're at. And the reason that was so impactful to me.
You cut out again.
About out.
Okay, you're good now.
The reason that was so impactful to me was because 6 weeks prior to that, I had a great review.
Right.
I'm doing awesome. I got all 5s and so completely out of the blue.
Hey, I got one better for you. I actually had a conversation with the CEO on a Tuesday afternoon. We spent 3 hours going through plans, action plans, my 5-year long-term incentive plan, all of this stuff, to get a call on Wednesday morning and tell me that was, they decided that my position was no longer needed.
Wow. That's got to be a record.
It was, right? The good thing was they at least honored my long-term incentive plan and paid it out for me, but still.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And in all fairness to the company, I mean, they tried so hard to keep fired me. They gave me a position. So I had to learn that I'm wired different than I thought I was.
Right.
So something said earlier, you get excited about being the guy, the person responsible for all of it.
Yes.
What I've discovered about myself, both through that process and then later on, as the years went on, that I don't necessarily thrive to be that guy. I thrive when I'm the guy standing next to that guy.
Right.
But that's my style.
Yep.
My style is I come alongside the person who's that high driving, get it done kind of
Right.
person, and I'm working on the how.
Yeah, see, and you're the guy I need because I don't want parameters. I don't want fences. I want, here's our goal. Here's our resources we have to work with, or what if we don't have them, what can we borrow or steal from somebody else? And then
Yeah.
I need somebody I can say, okay, here's the vision, here's where we're going, make it happen.
Precisely.
Right. So,
Yeah.
and I've always been blessed to have that guy, right? Whether it was male or female, to have that guy. And so yeah, I understand exactly what you're talking about. You put me in the position that you're talking about, you thrive in, I will wilt and die.
Mm.
Right. I can do it for a while, but it's too constricting for me.
Yeah.
And then I began to feel boxed in, and then I go, then I began to, my brain begins to go a lot of different directions. I think that's
How freeing is it to know that about yourself and to be able to make decisions, career goal decisions based on that?
Oh, it's very freeing, right? I look back at my career, and the things that the positions and the roles where I thrived or were the ones where I actually had that, right? And where people would just say, "Hey, here it is," and then they'd walk off. And if I didn't see them again for a month, that was great, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't need that every day. Hey, you're doing a great job. Oh, this is awesome. Hey, have you thought about moving that quarter inch to the left? Right? No, get out of here. It's going to be where it's at, right? But so yes, it was 100% freeing once I realized that, because I kept
Yeah.
putting myself into the roles that were not the right fit. Now I'm chameleon enough that I was able to adapt to do it, but I knew that as soon as I was bored, which would happen pretty quickly, that I would start chasing something else, and then I wouldn't stay in my lane. I'd be bumping outside and interfering with other people's stuff.
Yeah.
So yes, so very freeing.
And it was for me as well. When I finally submitted myself to, okay, I'm not supposed to be the guy.
Right.
I'm supposed to be the guy helping the guy.
But everybody's got a guy. Think about it, right? Yeah, I don't care who you are. Something pops up. It's like,
Yeah.
I got a guy. And I went back. A couple weeks ago, I talked about George Jetson, right?
Okay.
George Jetson, and people laugh, but when George Jetson got fired and left the company would not run because George was not there to push the button that started it. Because he was the guy that knew how to push the button, right?
Cool.
Seemingly an innocent thing and nothing nothing special about it. Anybody can push the button, but not anybody can push the button.
Yeah.
Right. So it's back to, sometimes the most important person is the janitor, right?
That's yeah, because nobody knows how to turn all the lights on.
No, right? That's true. And the days of a general manager or plant manager being able to be so involved in the weeds to the point that they know every button and every bump in the plant, if you have more than 10 people, those days are pretty much gone, right? Because
Yep.
you are so involved. And then the more international your company becomes, or the more interglobal, I guess it would be, that you have even less time, because now you're not answering to how your plant runs or how your business runs. You're answering to your stockholders, and you're answering to your board, and you're answering to different ones. And I mean, we did about $1 billion a year, and with a B, right? And 900 some employees that were around the world. And it was a challenge not keeping up with the employees and what they were doing, and the plants and what they were doing, with what the board was going to expect this week, right?
Yep.
And the games they wanted, and what report they wanted, and how they were going to do that. And I actually wrote a book that is just now coming out in print. It's Whose Circus Is This, and Why Is the Clown in Charge, right? And it is about and it is all about the stockholders and the boards, that really, we think the CEO is that all supreme being, right? He's the wizard behind the curtain, right? We think plant manager is this, we think this is that. But you know what? When you get there, you realize, no, there's always somebody else. There's always somebody else that's pulling my strings. There's always somebody else that's really running the big top here, and it's not necessarily me. And it may be my monkeys, and I may have to take care of them, but the overall circus, I don't get to control it. I just have to answer for it. Right. So yeah. Sorry, we derailed.
No, that's okay. I mean, it's all relevant and relative. So when I finally figured out how I was wired, how God wired me, and I started leaning into it and submitting to that,
Yeah.
it helped me make decisions. So much so, there's been multiple times where I've turned down high level
Mhm.
leadership positions, especially when it's not that I'm not able to do it.
Right.
I'm able to do it, but I've got to operate outside, so much outside of what what my design really
Right.
is. It's stressful for me.
Right.
I've got to work twice as hard as a Michael Sermon to be a COO of a large organization. I got to work twice as hard to do it. And it's very taxing on me.
Right.
However, I've discovered that if I'm allowed to be the guy next to the guy,
Right.
and I'm focused on helping the vision happen, solving problems, eliminating hurdles,
Right.
creating processes, all those things. I love doing those things. I'm actually gifted to do those things. And I don't burn half the energy
Right.
to do that stuff as I would if I was trying to be the COO.
Right.
So I'm even to the point where literally last summer I was offered the company that I now work for uh, had acquired a new. ac- Actually, we had acquired a location to do a whole new startup,
Right.
and I was offered that site
Right.
to be the leader. And I mean, I'm sitting there with my boss, who is the director, or actually the vice president of all of our manufacturing facilities.
Right.
And I'm telling him, thank you. I appreciate the offer. And quite honestly, I already knew. He didn't tell me, but I already knew that that job paid probably 25% more than what I
Right.
was making at the moment. And so I knew I was turning down a considerable raise. Quite honestly, almost life changing.
Yep.
Not quite, but almost life changing kind of money. But it was very easy for me to say thank you, but no
Yeah.
thanks. And I literally told him, I don't think I'm the right person for that role. I said, but I'm definitely the right person to help that person make this thing
Right.
happen,
Right.
which is exactly what I ended up doing.
Yeah.
And it's gone very well. And that's what I do for this company. I literally go from facility to
Yeah.
facility, and I help the site level leader basically help their facility perform better, help develop their leaders, come alongside the site
Right.
leader and do some coaching. And I love doing that. And I get to hit home runs
Yeah.
by doing that. It's one of the things that Dave likes to talk about. He's like, "Are you tired of hitting singles and doubles?
Yeah.
They're
Yep.
okay, and you got to hit them every now and then. You
Yeah.
can't hit home runs all the time. But if you're on a home run drought
Yeah.
of years, right? So by leaning into how I'm wired, how God wired me,
Yeah.
um, and just going all in
Yeah.
and stewarding that design. So in
Right.
other words, okay, I'm going to do this role, but I'm going to go learn some stuff. I want to learn more and more so I get better and better at what God wired me for. I'm not just going to sit back and just rest on automatic natural talent.
Right.
I'm going to take that natural talent. I'm going to read books,
Yeah.
get some coaching, get some training, and develop that.
Yeah. So a mutual friend of ours, that is one of the eagles in my life, right? That I've learned a lot from. And he talking to him this week, and I told him, I said, it's weird not seeing you as the CEO of the company. And he said, well, we have a CEO who's much better at it than I was, but it allows me to do what I do best because he deals with that. I get to deal with what I like doing. And
Nice.
I thought, you know what? It takes a lot of humility, it takes a lot of self-awareness, it takes a lot of emotional intelligence, really, to understand that and then actually submit to it, because the natural reaction is, to respond the way you did and the way I have over the years, right, when different setbacks would happen, and understand this
Yeah.
really isn't a setback. It was a realignment. It's hard when you're in it. right? It's easy to look back after the fact and see how God's hand was in something, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is, we have more setbacks in store for us. We have more storms in store for us. We have more challenges already that are laid out there. We just can't see them right now, right? Because they don't give us a schedule of when they're going to hit.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean God isn't still leading us through them. Doesn't mean God isn't still guiding us through the process and holding us as we do it, as we do life, right?
Yeah.
And then whenever it's done, we can look back and say, yeah, that was a God moment,
Yeah.
and because he's just as much God in the hard moments as he is in the, when it's a 25% pay cut versus a 25% pay raise, he's still the same God, right? And he still has a path and he still has a plan if we submit to it. But we get out over our skis. We think we let somebody else build our identity. We let somebody else decide who we're going to be, where we're going to go, how we're going to do it, right? It may be our parents, it may be our friends, it may be society in general, it may be a mentor or coach we had one time that is more interested in developing a successful leader than actually developing somebody who is healthy and whole and happy, right? And because you do find that, and because we do that, it sets us up to be more prone to the pruning storms. And I think that there's a lot of challenges that we endure that are self-induced.
It's you're talking about is very scriptural too. You're still God even in the low moments. Time and time again, we always refer to Job,
Right.
when allows those things to occur.
Right.
But it's throughout Scripture.
Mhm.
I mean, if you think, even in the another example we shared earlier was Moses.
Right.
God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Yeah.
God could have changed Pharaoh. I mean, God can change anybody's heart and mind. He could have changed Pharaoh's mind and heart in the very beginning, and Pharaoh would have been like, "Okay, you guys get out of here. Take whatever you want. You'll never see me again."
Right.
And that hardened Pharaoh's heart, all kinds of reasons.
Right.
Big part of it, of the allowance of those challenges to hit us, is to initiate growth and development and learning, but also our faith, strengthen our faith. You get to see how God comes through during those times when you get that setback and you're sitting across the table from the owner and the HR director and the boss, and they're saying,
Right.
you failed.
Right.
So that's where you're just like devastated, but God is still God, to your point you made a while ago. Well, he's God through all of that.
Mhm.
He knew that I needed a wake-up call so that I would turn towards and listen to a guy named Dave whenever he was introduced to me,
Right.
which had that not happened, I probably wouldn't have given it much thought, and I'd have still
Really?
been chasing. I really do. I really think I would not have given it that much thought, because that happened shortly before I was introduced to Dave. My eyes wide open.
Right.
I needed to hear that gave me some hope. So I was absolutely ready to hear something like that. But honestly, if things still chugging along, and then I was introduced to Dave, because I was introduced to Dave at a workshop on a Saturday at the church.
Right.
I went through the workshop and thought, wow, this is really cool, and then probably went on about my day and not really giving it a lot of thought. Can't say that for sure, but I really do think that I would not have engaged in it like I did.
You wouldn't have been as sensitive to it for sure, right?
No,
Because I think the storms and the challenges kind of soften the calluses or scrape the calluses away, often, right? Sometimes rip them away painfully, but then we're more sensitive to those things. Because you think back, I always go back to Joseph, right? Joseph saving all of Israel. Well, that wouldn't have happened had his brothers not sold him into slavery. Had he not been lied against and ended up in prison. Had he not been forgotten while he was in prison until that moment when it was needed. One says, "Hey, I remember I remember a guy when I was in prison that
I know a guy."
Yeah, I know a guy, and that guy happened to have the answer they needed. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that these things, yes, they do happen for purpose, and they can be good. Because the Bible is very clear. All things work together for the good of those who are called according to God's purpose, right? But we have to submit to that, and we have to understand that it doesn't say all things are good to them. It says all things work together for the good of them, right?
Yeah.
It's not all roses. It's not all chocolates, and right. It's sometimes it's thorns, and sometimes it's having to climb the tree and falling out of the tree and learning life, right? I laugh because we talk about, my child learned to walk. No, your child just learned not to fall, right? And that's what we do,
Yeah.
right? We don't learn to walk. We just learn not to fall. We don't necessarily, it never becomes totally comfortable to rely on hearing what God is saying and following after what God is having you do, because it's a constant fight with your own flesh and your own mind. But
Yeah.
you learn to avoid the pain of not doing that,
That's right.
right? And the cost of not doing that. So
So what do you say? What do you say to the person that they're like, okay, this is all really cool, but what does that look like in a practical sense? I mean, it's easy for us to look back at our pivotal moments and say that got my attention, so I started speaking.
right,
We started really speaking and leaning into our design and how God really wired to that person that's trying to figure out that their place from a leading role, a leadership role, because ultimately we're talking about leaders, and the we want we hope that people are going to pursue leadership at whatever capacity they're really wired for.
right,
So what do you that person? Okay, we don't want you to wait. At, although sometimes that's necessary.
right.
But how start trying to figure that out now? Not wait.
Well, I'll tell you what, the first question I ask any young person, anybody I'm interviewing for a position, is, what have you done to prepare yourself for this role? Right? That's always my very first question. And if their answer is, well, I'm here every day, well, you got a whole plant full of people here every day. Right? There's a skill set, there's a mindset associated with every role. And you said it earlier, right? You start preparing yourself for that role. You dress for the role that you want. You talk, you speak as that you're in the role that you're wanting, right? You have the mindset, the thought processes because honestly, if I'm thinking like the CEO, I don't care if I'm the guy on the floor, my decisions are going to be better because they're going to be broader spectrum at the angle of the CEO, right? From that perspective. And
Yeah.
if I really believe, and if you really believe that you're called into a leadership role, you have to understand what that means. You have to understand the skills and the tools that are there. And it's not always something that you can learn in a college course, right? That's just data. But it's when you take that information and you bring it in and you eat it and you allow it to begin to form your thoughts. And then you really start working on your own core, right? You understand who you are. You start managing yourself and holding yourself to a level of accountability that isn't dependent on anybody around you, right? And you mentioned it earlier. And then when you see that challenge, you don't see the challenge as an imposition toward you for you. You see that challenge as something that's going to help the overall mission better.
Yeah.
But so many of us, even that, I don't care. I'm almost 60 years old now. If I'm not careful, it's very easy for me to make a decision based on what's good for me, right? Because we are the center of our own universe, right? And so we're always about what's in it for me, what's in it for me, what's in it for me, what's in it for me. Well, as a young leader, you had to learn, and I had to learn, and millions of others had to learn that to be a leader, it can't be about you.
Yeah.
And you learn that by what you bring into you, right? Because as you read it, as you hear it, as you consume it, it affects how you think, how you see, how you behave, how you act, how you respond, and how you avoid reacting. And then you're the solution to the problem.
Got it.
Right. And it sounds like a lot, and it sounds like a very broad brush, but it's really not. Because it starts with, you just start reading that one book. You start listening to that one podcast, and then you add to it.
What was the first book? What was your first book? I know what mine was, but what was the first book? And did you go look for it, or did somebody hand it to you?
Well, I'll be honest. As a child, reading was my escape, and so I mean, one of the
actually, maybe I should preface that with, what was your first leadership book that got your attention? Was that something you went after, or was that something
Um,
somebody, "Here, you need to read this"?
I've always gone after them. But my very first book, I think I was a 12, 13 years old, and I read a book called The Art of Verbal Warfare, and that has stuck with me all these years. And then I went on. Then I later on I went on. I read The Goal, and I read Zig Ziglar's books, right? And then just kind of kept growing from there.
Wow.
But I have had some that people pushed at me and said, "Hey, you need to read these," and I'll read them. But I have a curse in that if I ever start something, I have to finish it, and I don't
Yeah.
care how bad it is. And some of the ones that I've gotten were horrible, and I had to read them. I think they were well intentioned, but they didn't speak to
Sure.
me, which made them horrible. Right? Other people really loved them, but for me, they didn't.
Yeah.
What was your first book?
The first, so I'm more of a typical guy, and I don't like reading. Almost, I want to say 85 to 90% of the leaders I talk to tell me they don't like to read,
I hear that they don't have time to read.
or and they don't have time to because they don't really enjoy it.
Yeah. Tammy and I actually talked about that today, right? It was easier to read and more enjoyable back when I could see better, right? But as the eyes get more tired, it makes it.
We are almost 60.
We are.
I'm wearing these. I didn't start wearing these until 5 or 6 years ago. Um, but so I was kind of typical in that I I didn't read a lot of books. I read
Right.
books when I had,
Ah,
or something I was really interested in. And I had to really be interested in. Well, not long after I was offered that first management position, my boss handed me, because he knew I felt like a fish out of water. Um, but he had confidence in me, but he wanted me to have confidence in myself.
right.
So John Maxwell's book, The
Ah,
21-Year
yep.
to Leadership.
Yes.
And today, as a matter of fact, I'm coaching a couple of young leaders in our company who had in the last one 3 months ago. The other one was probably about less than a year ago.
Right.
So both of them less than a year ago took the role of site leader
Okay.
at their
Nice.
facility. And so if you remember how I had your team, that them going through, that's my first book.
Yeah.
Just because it lays pretty good foundation, and it helps me start the conversations with the individuals, because it's more about the coaching than it is the book.
Yeah.
But that was the first one.
Yeah, but you've got to speak get on where you're speaking the same language first, right? Where you can start having a conversation. Yeah. So I guess I could be cliche. I can tell you the absolute first leadership book I ever read was called the Bible. Because for me that was very true, right? I'm very much an adherent
It's
of
the book.
it is, right? And so I remember as a child, one of our punishments was we would have to read the Bible. We'd sit in our room and we're in our room until we read the Bible from front to back.
Oh,
And
wow.
that would happen a couple times a year. So I learned that and read through a lot. So it really set my expectation for a lead, right? So when I started trying to identify or build my identity, because I didn't have dad around to do it for me, so I had to then go out and try to identify or create who I was going to be. Um, I went toward those type of leadership books, the successful people, the things they did, and how they did that. And when I was, remember when I was 12, I told my mom that I was going to be mayor of our community by the time I was 30. And no, I wasn't. I was 33, but
I was gonna say you got there. You
I
were
got there. I was 33. But it took me, we had to get into a couple board positions and work through that first. But it was some of those things that I knew early that I was called to do, right? So the things I learned and the things that I would do and the things I would focus on unconsciously kept coming back to that, which meant a lot of the leadership type books, a lot of that.
Gotcha.
And I learned early that I don't care what book you're reading. I mean, it can be the most insane fantasy book. It's still a leadership book. There's human dynamics involved in those books.
Very true.
And you can watch and you can see the interactions. And my personality style, if I'm not careful, is can be a manipulator, right? Because I still want to get what I want. And I was a youngest son, but a middle child, so I learned to get people to do what I wanted to do, so I could get what I wanted. And for that, you really had to become a student of people, which meant you become a student of leadership.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
But if you just had one message to your younger self, now that you've spent some time to know who you are.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've never truly. I've heard people ask that question of other people before. What would I say to my younger self? From any perspective?
It doesn't matter. I always have a follow-up question to it as well. So I'm just going to warn you that up front. So what would your message be to your younger self?
Number one would be submit to the lordship of Jesus at a much younger age. Yeah. That's hands down number one. Because I you've heard me say this many times, and we don't have time for this story, but the one-liner version of it is my wife and I's first 5 years of marriage was a train wreck, and I was the conductor running it off the rails. It was a mess. And until I genuinely, I knew who Jesus was. I knew who God was. I didn't grow up in church, but my mother always taught us. She demonstrated a faith that made believing so easy for me. Yeah. So I can't use that as an excuse. It's not that I didn't believe who Jesus was, but I never submitted to his lordship. Yeah. I was doing my thing, and I was a mess. And I was 24. It was in 1991. Right. So I would have been 23 at that point in time, but boy, I was already in that. So I would do that. That would, I would tell myself, submit to that way earlier. Yeah. So, I mean, but if you want to kind of pull it back to a leadership perspective. I
think that's the ultimate leadership perspective right there.
Ultimately it is, right? Yourself and submitting to the ultimate leader instead of yourself. Because I think that's where we derail a lot. We're trying to do it all within ourselves and look within ourselves and be everything for everybody. It's very self motivated. But if we'll submit to his lordship, it starts to pull us out of ourselves and start to realize, wow, okay, there's a lot of people out there. And you said earlier, as a leader, you gotta think about other people, and the term I use is being others minded. Yeah. And I was so now I'm going to tell you, just because I submitted to his lordship didn't mean that I suddenly, was all this zen and everything, and I, cared and thought of everybody. Right. That's been, we weren't taught how to be selfish. Right. You take any 2-year-old and take a toy away from them, they're going to get mad and say mine. You put two 2-year-olds in the same room with one toy, and they're not both going to be, oh, you can have it. Right. Okay, that's not going to happen. So our nature is very self-centered and selfish. So just submitting to that lordship, and then leaning into that and striving to get better and better at thinking of others. Yeah. That's huge to being a leader. Yep. Huge. Yeah. So I would tell myself to lean into that way early.
Right. I do appreciate you being here. And I guess really that kind of wraps it up. So thank you all for joining us on today's podcast.
Thanks for joining us on Lead Well, Live Whole. If this added value to your journey, share it with a friend and subscribe. Until next time, lead those you serve well and live your life whole.